Sir, we're a little busy today. If you don't have an appointment, you'll have to wait over there. Someone will get to you eventually. That's how it started. Harold Johnson had barely stepped inside the Heritage Federal Bank when the young teller's tone cut through the air like a cold wind. There was no smile, no welcome, just a dismissive gesture and a forced smirk. The kind of look that says, "You don't belong here." Harold, a well-groomed black man in his late 70s, stood tall in a neatly pressed cardigan, dark slacks, and shined brown leather shoes. His silver hair was carefully combed, his posture upright. He carried a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm, weathered but polished. Everything about him spoke of grace of experience, of quiet confidence. But that didn't matter here. To the staff at this sleek, glass-walled downtown bank, Harold was just another elderly walk-in, probably here to ask about some old account, maybe a pension check. He didn't wear designer labels. No Rolex, no briefcase with a corporate logo, just dignity. And apparently that wasn't enough. At the front desk, the teller barely glanced up again. Her nails tapped impatiently on the marble counter as Harold stood silently not moving. Behind her in a glass office, the branch manager noticed the interaction. A 30-something white woman in a tailored blazer, Brianna Marks, looked up from her monitor and raised an eyebrow. She leaned over to whisper something to her assistant, loud enough to be overheard. Another walk-in. "This week's been full of them," she chuckled. "We're not a soup kitchen." The assistant laughed. Harold heard every word. He didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. He just looked around the bank he had known so well but now felt like a stranger in. Marble floors, high ceilings, modern lighting, all pristine. But something else lingered under the polished arrogance. He stepped forward, gently placing his portfolio on the counter. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm here to speak with the branch manager." The teller didn't hide her annoyance. "She's busy, sir. And like I said, without an appointment, you'll have to wait." Harold nodded once, silently, and stepped aside. He sat down on the waiting bench near the window, adjusting his cuffs. 15 minutes passed. No one came to offer assistance, not even eye contact. Customers came and went, some greeted warmly, others escorted personally to their meetings. But Harold remained invisible. Across the room, Brianna finally rose from her desk and made her way over. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile floor. She stopped in front of him, arms crossed, fake smile, barely holding. "Sir," she said, her tone patronizing, "is there something I can help you with today? I understand you've been waiting." "I have," he said politely. "Standing, I'm here on business," she echoed, trying not to smirk. "We generally handle appointments for business clients." "Were you referred by someone?" Harold looked her in the eye. "I wasn't referred. I came on my own." "Well," she said, her smile tightening, "you have to understand we're not a walk-in center. For more advanced services, loans, investments, we typically schedule consultations." Harold glanced around the lobby, now noticeably quieter. Some customers were listening. A couple of junior employees had paused mid-task. "I see," he said softly. "So do you treat all walk-ins this way, or just the ones who look like me?" That landed like a pin dropping in a cathedral. Brianna blinked. "Excuse me?" I asked. Harold said evenly, "If this is your usual protocol, or if you save the dismissive treatment for certain kinds of people." Her lips parted, but no words came. The air grew tense. The assistant manager shifted uncomfortably behind his desk. Even the security guard at the door looked uneasy. Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. He didn't need to. He had already taken note of the offhand comments, the patronizing tone, the way his presence seemed to be treated as a burden instead of a client. And still he waited with grace. But something in his expression had changed. No longer just patient, now observant. Calculating because Harold Johnson didn't come here for a deposit or a withdrawal. He came to see what had happened to the place he helped build with his own two hands, and what he had seen so far. It told him everything he needed to know. The silence after Harold's question was deafening. Brianna's carefully curated smile faded. For a moment, she looked genuinely confused, not because she didn't understand the question, but because she couldn't believe she was being questioned at all. Harold didn't waver. His eyes were steady, his voice calm, but behind them was a quiet storm. This wasn't just about how he was treated. It was about what that treatment said about the people running this place. Before Brianna could regain her composure, Harold reached into his worn leather portfolio and slowly pulled out a stack of neatly folded documents. With deliberate care, he laid them on the front counter. "Since you seem unsure of who I am," he began, "let me make it very clear." He opened the top page, a company memo bearing the official letterhead of Heritage Federal Holdings. At the bottom, next to the bold black print that read Board of Directors, Special Authorization, was a signature. His signature, "I'm Harold Eugene Johnson. I founded this bank 32 years ago. From a single room over a laundromat in St. Louis to a multi-state financial institution." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. This branch, this very one, was the first to open under our urban inclusion program. It was supposed to be the model. He looked directly at Brianna, and now it's the warning. Around the lobby, heads-turned employees who had kept their distance were now watching openly. A few customers had stopped what they were doing and were listening closely. The air in the bank had shifted. The atmosphere, once thick with condescension, was now taut with uncertainty and a little fear. Brianna took a hesitant step back, glancing at the document. I don't understand." "You're the founder." Harold gave a slight nod. "And until I retired 5 years ago, I was the CEO. I built this institution from scratch, and this morning, the board voted unanimously to bring me back temporarily. I've been given full oversight of all branches for the next 90 days, while we audit leadership and customer service performance." He slid the memo closer to her. "And today was a surprise inspection." Her eyes scanned the page, her hands trembling slightly. "This can't be right, no one told us. No one said you'd be coming." "That's because I didn't want you to know," Harold replied. "I wanted to see how customers are treated when you think no one's watching. When they don't fit your picture of valuable." Brianna's face flushed. Her tone changed. "Trying to pivot, Mr. Johnson. If we had known who you were, You would have rolled out a red carpet," he interrupted. "But I don't need a red carpet. I need respect. I need professionalism. I need my customers, every customer, to feel safe when they walk through these doors." He turned and addressed the room, his voice slightly louder, now not angry but firm. "Do you know how many people walk into banks like this one and are judged before they even speak? How many veteran single mothers, senior small business owners, good people are turned away or treated like they're invisible?" He turned back to Brianna. "You didn't even ask for my name. You just assumed." Her lips moved, but no words came out. Harold continued pulling out another sheet. It was a copy of the original founding statement of the bank, dated and signed decades ago. "When I founded Heritage, I wrote this." He read aloud, "We will serve the underserved. We will offer dignity, not just dollars." No client shall ever be made to feel less than based on their income, their race, or their age. His eyes swept across the room again. This wasn't just a tagline. It was a promise. The entire room had gone still. Even the background music playing from the speakers had faded into irrelevance. Everyone was watching. Harold took a breath. What I saw today broke that promise. Brianna's face was pale now. She opened her mouth again, but he raised a hand. Not rudely, but with finality. You've had your say. Now it's my turn. From across the room, the assistant manager, James, a quiet man in his 40s, stepped forward. He had been standing near the back, trying to remain unnoticed, but now something in Harold's presence gave him courage. "Mr. Johnson," he said respectfully, "I've worked here for 6 years. I've tried to raise concerns before. The way some of the staff talk to customers, the way we ignore complaints. But nobody listened. Honestly, we didn't know if we could say anything without risking our jobs." Harold nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest, James. That means a great deal to me." Brianna looked stunned. "You, James, are you serious? We've always run a tight ship." Harold turned to her one last time. "Tight ships don't sink. This one is taking on water." Then he turned, picked up his documents, and walked calmly to the center of the lobby. "In 15 minutes, I learned more about this branch than I wanted to, but now that I know, we're going to fix it. Starting today." And with that, the tables had officially turned. Harold Johnson stood firmly in the middle of the lobby, a man in his late 70s, but in that moment he carried the presence of a leader decades younger. His voice, clear and resolute, echoed not just across the marble floor, but deep into the conscience of everyone watching. Across from him, Brianna Marks, the branch manager who had just moments ago dismissed him as an inconvenience, stood frozen still, holding the memo she had reluctantly skimmed. Her jaw clenched, her posture stiff, but her authority had visibly crumbled. Trying to salvage what was left of her pride, she stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson," she said with a breathy attempt at control, "I want to apologize again. Obviously, there's been a misunderstanding. Had I known." But Harold stopped her cold with a raised hand, the same quiet gesture of finality that had already silenced her once before. "This isn't about a misunderstanding," he said. "This is about culture, a toxic one, a culture that you helped create, and that I came here today to see for myself." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His tone cut sharper than any raised voice ever could. It was the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime building something meaningful only to see it tarnished by arrogance. "I watched you ignore customers. I watched you mock an elderly man who walked in for service. I watched you whisper behind the counter while others laughed. You didn't act this way because you were overwhelmed. You acted this way because you believed no one was watching, and because you assumed you could get away with it." She opened her mouth, but again, no words followed. There was nothing to say, not in front of a growing audience that now included not just staff, but nearly every customer in the lobby, all now witnessing something they knew they'd never forget. Harold turned to the assistant manager, James, who was still standing nearby. "Tell me honestly, James, if you had said something, if you had pushed back against how things were being run, what would have happened?" James hesitated, his eyes darting to Brianna, then back to Harold. "Honestly, I'd have been written up, maybe even fired. We've had people leave this branch after one bad week with her. There's a lot of fear and favoritism. Harold nodded thoughtfully. Thank you. Then he pointed toward the front doors and asked the security guard to lock them temporarily. The room went still. Not in panic, but in curiosity. Something important was happening and no one wanted to miss it. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Harold said, raising his voice just slightly. "We're going to do something unusual today." He walked to the center of the lobby and motioned for the employees to gather around. Hesitantly, they left their desks and cubicles and formed a loose semicircle. The customers, sensing that this was far more than a routine visit, sat quietly and watched. "We're going to have a staff meeting," he announced. "Right now. Right here." Brianna's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't be serious. This is highly unprofessional." Harold turned to her. Slowly. "Unprofessional is walking into a bank you built with your own hands and being treated like you're a trespasser." She said nothing. He took a slow breath. 32 years ago, I started this bank with a very clear mission to treat every single customer with dignity, regardless of their background, their clothing, their income, or the color of their skin. Dignity is not a service. It's not a perk. It's a right. He looked around the room, pausing to meet the eyes of every staff member present. What I witnessed today wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a breakdown in our values. A woman in a sharp suit mocking a veteran for asking about a savings account. A young teller rolling her eyes at a Spanish-speaking customer struggling to understand a form. And yes, a branch manager, assuming an elderly black man couldn't possibly have real business here. He let those words hang heavy. Some staff looked at their shoes. Others looked ashamed. James, meanwhile, stood straighter, silently nodding with quiet approval. "Brianna," Harold said, turning back to her, "do you remember the company's founding statement?" She blinked. I think so." "Good," he said, "because I wrote it. And I meant every word." He pulled out a laminated card from his wallet, old and a little worn, but still legible. He read aloud. "We serve our communities with integrity and respect. We listen more than we speak. We lift more than we judge. And we never forget that behind every account, number is a human being." A quiet murmur passed through the staff. The weight of the moment was undeniable. Then Harold asked one final question. "Is that the kind of bank we are today?" No one answered. He looked at Brianna once more. Her face had gone pale. Her eyes darted to her assistant, then to the lobby, as if searching for a way out. "Brianna Marks," he said, his voice calm but commanding, effective. "Immediately, you are relieved of your duties as branch manager of this location." Gasps rippled through the room. "You can collect your personal items now. Security will escort you out." She stood motionless, stunned, her lips trembling. "Mr. Johnson, please, I'm not doing this to punish you," Harold said. "I'm doing this to protect the soul of this institution." You had a choice every day. You walked into this branch, and today you showed everyone what kind of leader you are. As the security guard stepped forward, Brianna backed away, visibly shaken. The assistant stepped forward instinctively to help her gather her things. But Harold wasn't done. He turned to James. "I've heard good things. From the board, from clients, and what I saw from you today confirmed it." James looked startled. "Sir, congratulations," Harold said with a soft smile. "You're the interim branch lead." Another murmur filled the room, this one softer. A few nods. A few claps. It wasn't loud, but it was meaningful. The shift had happened. The power had returned to the people who actually lived, the values of the bank. Harold remained standing in the middle of the lobby, eyes, steady shoulders squared. Around him, the staff stood frozen, unsure of what came next. Some looked at the floor. Others dared to meet his gaze, though not without guilt, clouding their faces. It wasn't fear that hung in the air, not anymore. It was realization that they'd witnessed more than a firing. They'd witnessed a mirror being held up. Harold turned slowly, taking in the space. The lobby, so modern and pristine in design, now felt like a shell, a hollow facade built on policies and polished branding, but empty of the values that once gave it soul. I want you all to hear me. Harold began his voice, low, firm, and steady. And I want you to remember this moment because it's going to define what happens from here on out. The staff leaned in instinctively. This was no longer about policies or procedures. This was something deeper. When I started this bank, I was a black man in a business suit who couldn't get a seat at the table. I was denied loans for my first business, denied meetings, denied respect. So I built the table myself. He paused, but I didn't build it just for me. I built it, so no one else. No matter their color, their accent, their background, their clothes would be shut out the way I was. He stepped forward, looking into the eyes of the employees nearest him. What happened here today was more than bad customer service. It was a betrayal. A betrayal of the very reason this place exists. The teller who had first dismissed Harold looked visibly shaken now. Her eyes glassy, her hands clasped nervously. Behind her, a junior employee wiped his palms on his khakis, trying to stay still. You see, respect isn't just for VIP clients or people with last names you recognize. Respect is for everyone. That includes the man who parks our cars, the woman who asks 100 questions about her savings account because she's never had one before, the veteran who wears worn-out boots but walks in here with pride. Harold's tone didn't rise. It deepened with weight, with purpose. We do not run this place with sarcasm. We do not lead with assumptions. We do not decide who's worthy of kindness based on whether they look like they just stepped out of a luxury catalog. He stopped allowing the words to land, to sting if they needed to. Then he reached into his pocket again and pulled out that same worn founding card. He unfolded it and held it up not as a prop, but as a promise. This charter was written in ink, but the values behind it. They were written in struggle, in sweat, in prayers, and in the hopes of every person who never felt seen in places like this. He turned to James, now standing beside him, still stunned by the responsibility just handed to him. "This is your team now," Harold said. "But more than that, this is your mission. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be human." James nodded slowly, taking it all in. "I understand," Sir Harold smiled faintly. "Good. Because the hardest part of leadership isn't knowing all the answers. It's knowing when to stop, listen, and look someone in the eye like they matter." He turned back to the group. "I don't expect all of you to transform overnight, but I do expect change to begin today. I'll be back next week. I'll speak with clients. I'll review service reports. I'll observe quietly, just like I did today." He walked over to a nearby table and picked up a service brochure, the kind of glossy handout that boasts about award-winning care and exceptional customer satisfaction. Then he held it up. "This means nothing," he said, "if the person handing it out thinks they're better than the person receiving it." A hush fell again, but this time, it wasn't shame alone. It was reflection. Staff began exchanging glances, some embarrassed, others thoughtful. The shift was happening slowly, uneasily, but undeniably. In the back, a woman who had been sitting silently, a customer waiting to speak to someone about a retirement account, raised her hand slightly. Harold turned. "Sir," she said gently, "I just wanted to say I saw everything, and I've been coming here for years. I never knew who you were, but now I'm proud to bank here." Harold gave her a small, grateful nod. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Then to the whole room, "Let's make sure she and everyone like her always feels that way." With that, Harold walked toward the front of the branch. As he passed the reception desk, he paused, glanced back at the group once more, and said the words that would linger long after he left. "Kindness is free, but the lack of it can cost everything." And then he walked out. The air in the bank had changed. After Harold walked out through those tall glass doors, no one rushed to speak. No one pretended to be busy or tried to laugh off what had just happened. It was as if time had stopped, and all that was left was a room full of people processing the weight of everything they'd just seen. It wasn't every day that your company's founder walked in unannounced, exposed the rot beneath the surface, and fired your branch manager in front of the entire staff and a room full of customers. But the most remarkable part wasn't the firing, it was the message that followed. Because what Harold had done wasn't about punishment, it was about standards, legacy, and the invisible cost of forgetting where you came from. Now with Brianna gone and the staff still standing in a quiet semicircle, all eyes slowly turned to James. He didn't look like the kind of man who sought the spotlight. His shirt was a little wrinkled at the shoulders, his tie slightly crooked. But in that moment, he stood taller than anyone else in the room. One of the younger tellers finally broke the silence. "So what happens now?" James took a breath. He looked around the room at faces filled with uncertainty, humility, and somewhere under the surface the hope that maybe things could be different. "I guess now," he said slowly, "we proved that we deserved this second chance." He paused, then added with more conviction, "We start by listening." The next hour at the branch didn't look like a normal business day. Phones rang but weren't answered with the usual robotic scripts. Clients approached desks, and employees actually took time to look them in the eye, ask questions, offer real help. James called a quick staff huddle. Not a formal meeting, just a moment to ground everyone. He repeated Harold's word about kindness, dignity, and presence. "We're not just a bank." He told them we're part of people's lives that means something. No one argued. For the first time in a long time, the team wasn't running on autopilot. They were awake. That afternoon, James sat down at the desk that had once been Brianna's. He didn't move into the corner office. Instead, he left the door open and used the public workstation, the one where customers could see him. "If I'm going to lead," he explained, "you're going to see me doing the same work you do. That's how Harold did it. That's how we'll do it." He made a list of changes, not dramatic ones, just small, meaningful shifts. A customer feedback board near the entrance. A weekly 5-minute meeting for staff to share one story, good or bad, about a client interaction. A monthly mentorship session where junior tellers could shadow senior advisors and ask real questions without fear. It didn't take long for the word to spread. Customers started talking. "That guy in the cardigan, did you know he owns the bank? I heard the founder came in and fired the manager on the spot. They say he's coming back next week to check in." Within 2 days, the energy inside the branch was noticeably different. Customers lingered a little longer. Staff smiled more real smiles, Not the forced kind you get from memorized training. There were still hiccups. Of course, habits don't change overnight, but the intent was different. A few of the employees who had been closest to Brianna seemed unsure about the shift. One of them, Tyler, had been her assistant and looked visibly out of place during the first new team meeting. But James approached him one-on-one. "You're not tied to her," he said. "You're tied to this place, and it's worth fighting for." Tyler nodded, almost relieved. "I just didn't want to get caught in the middle. We're not picking sides." James said, "We're building a new one." By the end of the week, something unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman walked in, dressed, simply holding a cane, and asking about refinancing his home. Normally, he might have been waved toward a form or told to make an appointment, but this time the teller stood up, walked around the counter, and said, "Sir, let me help you with that. You don't have to stand long, we'll take care of you." Another customer overheard and smiled. A woman sitting nearby, one who had been present during Harold's visit, clapped once under her breath. Quiet but proud. Later that day, a floral arrangement was delivered to the branch. No card, just a bouquet of white lilies and blue hydrangeas with a small note taped to the vase. "Thank you for remembering what this place stands for." James placed it on the front desk right beside the new suggestion box. That evening, after the doors had closed and the last transaction had been processed, James sat alone at the back table with a cup of coffee. He pulled out his phone and drafted an email to Harold, subject progress, Mr. Johnson. "I don't know what the next 90 days will look like, but I promise you this. We heard you. We're doing the work, not just for you, but for every person who ever walked through that door and felt invisible. Thank you for giving us a second chance. James." He hit send. And as he turned off the lights and stepped outside into the crisp evening air, he paused for a moment and looked back through the glass. The lobby wasn't just clean, it felt lighter. Just maybe, this bank was finally on its way back to being what it was always meant to be. Not just a place to store money, but a place where people mattered. 1 week later, Harold Johnson returned to the branch, not in silence this time, and not unannounced. He walked in just after 10 a.m., dressed much the same as before, brown cardigan, tan slacks, and polished shoes. No security detail, no press, just Harold exactly as he was, the man behind the name, the soul behind the brand. But this time, the response was different. As he stepped through the front doors, every head in the room turned not out of confusion or suspicion, but with quiet respect. The receptionist stood. James walked out from his office with a smile. Even the customers paused, recognizing the man whose presence had reset the course of this branch just days earlier. Mr. Johnson James greeted warmly, offering his hand. "Welcome back." Harold shook it firmly. "Good to be back, James." He looked around and saw subtle but meaningful changes. A new sign at the entrance read, "Here everyone matters." The feedback board near the front was already half full, peppered with handwritten notes from customers. And behind the counter, employees moved with a kind of purpose that hadn't been there before. Not just efficiency, but intention. "I see you've been busy," Harold said, eyes scanning the space with quiet pride. James smiled. "We're trying to earn it back, day by day." Harold nodded. "That's all I ever asked." He stayed for an hour that day, not to inspect or criticize, but to sit down with employees, ask questions, shake hands with clients. He spoke with a young mother opening her child's first savings account, a retired school teacher seeking investment advice, and a small business owner making his first major deposit. Every conversation mattered. Every handshake meant something, and when Harold finally stood to leave, he paused at the exit, just long enough to leave one final message. He turned toward the room, eyes meeting the faces of staff and clients alike. Legacy, he said quietly, isn't built by policies or marble floors. It's built by people. Every choice you make, every word you speak, every person you help or ignore shapes what this place becomes. He placed a hand over his heart. You don't have to wear a suit to be important. You don't have to be young to lead, and you don't have to be rich to deserve respect. Then he smiled, gentle but strong. This bank will only be as good as the values it lives. Not the ones on paper, the ones in practice. He turned and walked out the same way he came in. No ceremony, no spotlight. Just a quiet man who reminded a room full of people what decency looked like. A few weeks later, corporate released a short video about the changes at the downtown branch, featuring interviews with staff, new client testimonials, and a brief clip of Harold Johnson walking through the lobby, his hands behind his back, observing with a quiet smile. The caption read, "He built it from nothing. And when it lost its way, he came back not to take control, but to remind us who we are." And so the story of the man they once overlooked became the lesson they'd never forget. Because sometimes the most powerful leaders don't arrive with loud voices or flashy titles. Sometimes they walk in quietly, wait 15 minutes, and change everything forever. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message. Because no matter your age, your background, or your title, everyone deserves to be seen respected and treated with dignity. Let's build a world where we lead with kindness. One story at a time.